Maybe you need a foreigner to walk into your world. An outsider who goes, wow, you look different, you live different, and I want to inspect and see if your God is better than the gods that I was taught to follow.
Welcome to What We Couldn't Say on Sunday, the podcast where we dive deeper into the thoughts, reflections, and messages that couldn't make it into Sunday's sermon. Whether it's a story left untold, a lesson needing more time, or a question left unanswered, this is the space where we can explore the faith journey together in a deeper, more personal way. I'm your host, Seth. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. All right, hey, thanks for joining us again for another episode. We're glad to be back after a few weeks. It's been a minute, but we are excited for this new series. We're jumping into Ruth, 10 Toes In. It's exciting to see this series where it's about going all in and what does it mean to look at the story of Ruth in her lineage and the backstory with Boaz and all of this that's going on that we're going to unpack over the next several weeks on Sundays. Just what does this mean for our faith? We're excited to look at this. We're excited to come back with a little bit more information on what we couldn't say on Sunday. So we hope that you join us for the next few weeks in this new series, and we hope that you grow in some way spiritually in your faith and what it means to be all in for Christ. So I'm Seth. I'm your host. I'm here with Pastor Kyle as we're coming off of this new series, week 1. It's good to be back on a series. I feel like the last month of May has just been these kind of one-offs with Mother's Day and a couple other weeks with Seed to Soil. If you've been with us for there's been a lot of cool things we've been doing in May, but it's good to be kind of getting into a rhythm here.
Yeah, I always title, so I categorize all of my messages by the month. And I went and looked. In 3 years, I've just called May Mayhem.
Mayhem, yeah.
Because it never works out. It's never clean. It's never 2 years ago, we managed a series in the month of May. And
what was that?
It was the Me and My Emotions.
Oh, that was a good one.
Emojis. But hilarious about the emotions is we just connected emotions to the mayhem of May. It wasn't like a linear thought. May, I'm convinced, and I've asked my church friends about my other pastor friends, the busiest month of the year is not Christmas. It is May.
Yeah,
it is May. It is just wild how insanely busy it is. So we are out of it.
We are through.
We are into June. We were into summer in Northeast Ohio, which was winter.
Oh my word. And not just winter. It was like just so wet, like so wet.
Yeah.
Trying to get outside again. It was just, and then we went from that right to midges, which if you're not from here,
the Canadian Air Force this year has been insane.
It's awful. We live a mile from the lake, and it is just, I feel like yesterday was a little bit of a reprieve, but they're so bad this year.
We have, so if you do not live in the Northeast Ohio, we have these thing called midges that come across Lake Erie from Canada, and they last 2-3 weeks.
Yeah.
And they are a swarm.
It's like a mosquito that doesn't bite you.
Completely harmless. They're just everywhere. And it's been bad this year.
Anyways, well, we're here, and we're talking about Ruth. And more than Ruth, I feel like Ruth is the topic, but it's way more than that. Can you give us your thoughts? Like, I know you talked about it on Sunday, you spent a whole lot of time setting it up, but for you, why Ruth? Why now?
That is a great question. I did not expect that question. That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
I had an answer. Well, no. My first answer would be, and I wouldn't say a lie. It's not a lie. It's just interesting. It just jogged my memory. When I knew I wanted to be a pastor was one date. I felt like this calling. Then as I graduated school and I took my first year assignment in ministry, it was like this eye-opening experience of like, what does it mean to teach a concept? And then as I stepped into my second year of ministry, I stumbled upon a communicator who did a series on Ruth. And I have been infatuated with this story because it was the first book of the Bible that I ever dove, studied, and then preached from start to finish. And it's interesting because that was 20 years ago. I mean, it was 2008, so that's not quite 20 years ago, but a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And since 2008, I have not spoken or worked through the book of Ruth. And so since then. And I'm going to be straight honest. In 2008, I straight copied word for word what this pastor had said.
Mm-hmm.
Not word for word. Not that I copied him.
Heavily influenced.
I didn't plagiarize him, but I'm sitting here going, I allowed him to be the only source of information that motivated my teaching.
Yeah.
So with this year, I started to relook at the book, and one of my frustrations with the book was that it's always taught, it's always preached, it's always sermonized in a sense that it's a love story. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a love story in it, but I do not think that by and large the book is about a love story. I think that sells the text short of the providence and the redemptive potential that God would want us to know. It's not just a love story. And so...
And would you say usually from Ruth's perspective too?
Oh yeah, for sure from Ruth's perspective. I mean...
That's just a kind of assumed angle you would take on the book.
Everyone. It's always a love story. It's always like a feminine designed or feminine focused love story that champions her faithfulness, and that's it. And it just, it's like always a sanitized version of it. It's always just cleaned up, and it's nice, and it's wherever you go, I'll go, and where you die, I'll die. And we just hone in on what I think are cool parts, but they're not the key parts. And so as I was arcing out my year, this year, I knew I wanted to do Ruth, and I kind of had this 1 month open that I hadn't really got to yet, and it was Father's Day, and I'm like, and we usually, go a masculine route. We try to not appeal to men, but use the month of June with Father's Day to talk about how to become better fathers, husbands, sons, brothers, be men of God. And so I was like, you know what? Let's do Ruth. And that'll force me to have to teach this from an angle that does not lean feminine or sanitized or about a love story.
Yeah, because if you look back through some of our August series over the years, you've done Don't Give Up the Ship, right? Then you had a Jonah series, then Warrior, which was on David. And then 2021, I guess was right before you started Heart to Heart. That was like Steve's lot. Yeah. Anyway, so just some context there to say, these are more male dominant. And so obviously Ruth, the title can seem like it's a bit more female driven, but what you're saying is, hopefully the angle we get on this is way more than just what you've heard with Ruth before.
And exactly. And so that's how I started. Number one is I didn't title the series Ruth. I mean, because again, your mind goes, oh, it's a woman. It must be about her life. I titled the series 10 Toes In because every character that we learn the significance of their life, from Elimelech, Naomi, Ruth, Boaz, every character goes all in. They don't do anything partially.
Yeah.
They go all in, and they reap the consequences of going all in on their decision. Mm-hmm. Elimelech went all in and moved his family out of Bethlehem. Naomi went all in and said, you know what? I'm going to sacrifice this home that I've built, these neighbors that I've made, and I'm going to go back. Mm-hmm. Ruth went all in when she said, you know what? I'm going to leave everything I know, and I'm going to go into the unknown because there's something about your God that intrigues me. And, spoiler alert, Boaz goes all in on choosing to love someone that society and culture deemed worthless. Mm-hmm. Choosing to embrace a person and her faithfulness that everyone else would have thrown out.
Then also choosing to take up on a role historically within a family of a kinsman redeemer that meant doing that, right? He also, at the same time, right? Like he's stepping into a calling, even if that calling is a little ugly in the sense of like, it's not pretty.
Yeah.
But sorry.
And this is a question, and we'll cover this in week 2. I mean, we will. And that's the question that I have, that maybe this is a hook, bait for the next one. Was the kinsman redeemer a product or a result of his faithful obedience, or the intention in his calling?
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting question. No doubt that's what he became. No doubt that was the natural byproduct of his choices, right? He was a kinsman redeemer, but was that ever a motivation? That's my interest.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what was did you feel like this week you set up a lot of the backstory of Judges, right? Like this happening in that era, a lot of the reality of Moab. What is our Moab was a big question out of this, kind of set the story, and then they make their way back to Bethlehem was the context. Was there anything that like surprised you coming at Ruth a second time, right? Because this is your second time hitting Ruth as a pastor, preparing that for this first week that you were like, oh, I didn't necessarily plan on getting into that, but that's the way it worked out. Or, something from even just the perspective of how the congregation you felt like responded this week.
Yeah. It's interesting when, we took May off because of the craziness of May, and just it all over the place and travel schedules and all that stuff. So to come back in knowing that the podcast was back on in a sense also was a key factor. Cause to me, the difference is I loved the book of Ruth, obviously, cause it was the first book of the Bible that I deeply studied, and there's so much in it. So much in it. The other aspect is, how do you make it practical?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all for studying books of the Bible, but for me, my passion has always been as a communicator, and a former pastor that I had, his name's Vern Streeter. He's an incredible, I would say he is one of the key thumbprinters of me, which, side note, I posted our artwork for this series, and one of a mutual friend who went to that church that I worked at said, hey, you need to check out Pastor Vern's sermon series on Ruth. And I have never listened to it. And I want to listen to it, but I'm not going to listen to it until I'm done working my series, because I don't want it to influence mine. I was like, I want to stay pure and see if the mentee aligned with the mentor. I'm very curious to see.
Huh.
But anyway, but he would always say to me, he's like, listen, people need eternal hope. Absolutely. Your job as a pastor, number one, is to give people hope for eternity, to tell them about the good news of the gospel. He's like, but never neglect the fact that we serve people who need hope for tomorrow. Like, you have to help them cross the contextual bridge of why why scripture is relevant today. And so as I've worked my ministry, as I've grown, and not only as a lead pastor, but just a communicator, it definitely is the fresh perspective of preaching Ruth now is it relevant today? It's a cool story. It's got a lot of twists and turns, but is it actually relevant? And so that's definitely the bent that I took in this series, and I'm gonna keep very practical on Sundays. And I think my desire is to use the podcast to go, hey, here's some interesting things that, while they're not practical for everyday living, they're intentional.
Yeah, they can even enhance your experience with this, and give you a bigger frame to see it, and not necessarily make you do something different, but at least help you to see it from a deeper angle.
Yeah. I mean, because this is the first book of the Bible written specifically about a person's life is a woman in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. And I just keep coming back. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's because my daughter is going to be 13 this summer, and I think she's got a calling on her life. But the belief that women do not have a place in ministry, that they are to be silent, I cannot process it, because when I look at the Old Testament, when I look at the design, the story, the narrative, it is always showing the significance of women's role, not only in the home, but in the ministry and the move of God.
Yeah.
And so we can't breeze past that.
No.
That's significant.
And even historically, to look at the function of Ruth, and maybe you're getting into this, I'm kind of jumping ahead here possibly, but the book of Ruth was one of 5 books that were part of the Jewish connecting the Jewish people's role, like their history, right? And this was one of the, obviously you have the law, like the first 5 books of the Bible, right? That are kind of like the what we do, but like it's part of the who we are type of narrative that was tied to Jewish celebrations. So this one would have been tied to like Pentecost and like the end of that like harvest season, and just how much, like you said, the role of women, but also tied to heritage on who they are, and why it was used in that way, and the fact that, like you said on Sunday, there's not a whole lot of like prayer or worship necessarily. If you look at it that angle, like the idea of praying to God and worshiping the Lord, he's referred to like may the Lord Almighty be like, I mean, he's referenced for sure, but it's not necessarily this like what we do type of book. It's more of this kind of just history of who we are as a people and the characteristics that gives. Like you said, you can't look at this and not see God's divine design in that.
Yeah, his providence is unreal. But also it is a what a fitting time to work through the book of Ruth, in that Pentecost is this Sunday. Mm-hmm. And then also, and I always wondered when this was going to influence me, but just right now politically, our thoughts on the foreigner. This past February, I got to go down to the border, and everything I think that I know about border policy and the border problem was wrong. Everything that I've ever heard on the news about the border reality is not true. And I know that's a pretty lofty declaration. Hey, what the news says is incorrect. But I've never been more confident of that when you go down there, when you talk to all the parties. And so I think it's a time in our country, a time politically, a time in our lives where understanding our biblical responsibility of how we treat people who look like us, and more importantly, how we treat people who don't look like us. This is a really good text to study, because this is the great grandmother of King David, who would have never entered the line if it wasn't for Boaz's generosity. Mm-hmm. And that's the crazy is, man, if God can use a foreigner to change the future of every living being, man, maybe we shouldn't be so quick to dismiss foreigners. Now, listen, that's not a political statement. It's not we need open borders. We don't have to get political. It's not political. I'm just sitting here going, what is irrelevant of your political position? What is irrelevant of your country that you live in? What is irrelevant of what flag you wave is our biblical mandate of how we're to treat people. And that I will die on that hill. And if that is a divisive statement, I stand with Jesus, and I'm 100% okay with that.
That's a pretty good place to stand.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I really do. I think so.
All right. So jumping into it, I think all those things are so fitting, right? Like with the timeliness and all of that and irrelevancy, but also I think what we're saying with all of this last however long we've been talking is we are intentional about the season, and we hope that it challenges some preconceived notions on the text and even on your worldview. But also, men of the house, like, look at this in this season of how we celebrate fatherhood, how we celebrate, there are lessons, there are things that we need to be challenged by this text, specifically with men, specifically with, all generations, but, be willing to receive. And
again, spoiler alert, right? If that's my arc, if I could summarize week 1, and this is from a behind the scenes, not a behind the scenes, but from a podcast standpoint. Week 1 was, men, here's what happens when you don't lead. Here's what happens when you choose not to stand for your faith in the face of your comfort. And week 3, when we pick up or end this series, both in week 3 and week 4, we're going to see, men, here's what happens when you choose to lead your family. Mm-hmm. Everything falls or rises on leadership. Elimelech was a poor husband and a poor father. Boaz, we're going to see, is going to become an amazing husband and an even better father.
Yep.
And that's pretty cool.
Where do you want to jump in with things? A couple things that didn't make the sermon, or just were extra stuff, because obviously with the start of a series there's so much context.
A couple things that stand out that just didn't make the threshing floor is again, because taking in consideration this is the first book, in the canonical order. Did I say that right? I think so.
Close enough.
Yeah, I mean,
order of
the Torah is a very packaged thing. It's essentials, right? And then we get into the historical, as you said, to the Jewish people. Here are the details you need to know that we've designed our culture on. We see Joshua, that is the taking of the promised land, how he inspired his people, the shortest and greatest sermon, purify your hearts, for tomorrow the Lord wants to do a good work in you. And that's always the case. Like, hey guys, all that we can do today is purify our hearts of what God might do in us tomorrow, because he can do anything with pure hearts. And we see that. And then we jump into Judges, and that is a time of chaos. As I said on Sunday, wild, wild west, everyone saw fit. You see these crazy anti-heroes. Samson's an anti-hero. That would be a great title of a series on Judges, the anti-hero.
Anti-hero?
Mm-hmm. Just these oddball characters who, because they were willing to trust God, because they were willing to believe in a greater potential of the Jewish faith or the Israelites, they did incredible things. And then out of Judges, we go right into Ruth. And again, first character is a woman, and we get her life story. And so I don't think that's an accident. And my point is, that means that if the book of Ruth is not an accident, and a lot of historians and theologians believe Samuel wrote it, what did Samuel want us to know about her, about these players? Why did this story matter? And so that's kind of my lens in which I kind of reflected today's prep on for the podcast, is what matters. And not everything mattered to the sermon on Sunday, but everything matters in the text. And so for me, just some of the names of the players are interesting to me. So Elimelech, right, his name means God is my king. Now, names in the Bible are often declarations of their life, like what they. And so what's amazing to me is how many of us are guilty of being like Elimelech, where we say with our mouth, God is my king, but it's everything but our actions.
Right.
And so that's interesting that someone whose name literally is the declaration that I'm going to trust God because he's my king would sacrifice his family's future for comfort or sustenance in a time of a famine.
Or like Abraham go, oh, I have this calling on my life, but I'm going to solve it my way.
Yep.
Instead of going, wait a second, God said he'd provide.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Still trying to live into this reality of what God is my king, but I'm just, over time, I'm going to do it my way.
Right. And then you have Naomi, which it's funny. Her name, when you know what her name means, it's hard to not see that as her character, especially in chapter 1, even more so in chapters 3 and 4. But her name means pleasant, and she was just pleasant to be around. She's a pleasant woman. I could see that pleasant people are attractive. I could see why initially the two daughter-in-laws did not want to leave her, because they probably loved her. They probably liked being around her. Mm-hmm. The two sons, which was wild to me, Mahlon and Chilion, which I said this on Sunday and I'm going to say it again because I think it's wild. They sound like Klingon names.
Yeah, they do.
Like right out of Star Trek.
Yeah.
But what is trippy to me is that Mahlon means sickness. What killed him? I don't know.
Probably sickness.
Yeah. But that's
dysentery. What is that? That Oregon Trail?
Yeah. I mean, but his name, it literally means sickness. Like, was that really his name, or was that after the fact when they're telling this story and it's a dramatic retelling? I don't know. But his name is sickness. Okay. And then Chilion, wasting away and puny. That's what his name means, which probably, again, is how he died. He wasted away and he was puny. Mm-hmm. He was probably defeated. He probably ran his mouth. I don't know. But I find those word choices cannot be missed. Okay. Then you get to the women, the daughter-in-laws. You have Ruth and Orpah, which I'm going to go with Orpah first. Orpah means a fawn, which to me is so perfect. Mm-hmm. we just had, so again, Northeast Ohio, it's spring. We have a deer problem.
Oh, awful.
There's just deer everywhere here.
There may be as many deer as there are midgies.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So at our office, we have a Christian school, we have our church, right? And so this year, this is new, we had a baby deer that somewhere in our property near our parking lot was birthed, and so the fawn would take residence under the cars during the day, which awful because someone doesn't pay attention to what's under their car and they pull away, and you have a murder scene in a parking lot with an elementary school. That's disastrous. So we have these fawn problems, and
which did not happen, by the way.
Yeah. The fawn lived. We have relocated the fawn, and it's all that stuff. But when you look at the attributes of a fawn, they follow the mother around.
Mm-hmm.
They are incapable of surviving on their own. And I see this in Orpah as like, she's just this peripheral person in the story who follows the ladies around. And then when she finally hears that life is going to be hard, she finally hears that she doesn't have a future, she bounces and we never hear from her again. Again, the name is fitting. You then go to Ruth. This name is so interesting to me. Ruth means a beauty or desirable, which again sets up how did this foreigner catch the eye or catch the attention of Boaz, who was the prince, of his tribe. How did he have an interest in becoming her kinsman redeemer? Well, because she was hot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she was desirable.
Right.
And again, that's interesting is, our beauty is a thing to behold. But what I want to stress, ladies, is yes, looks are not everything. Her heart and her faithfulness, I think we'll see in the coming weeks, spoke louder than her beauty.
Right.
But I think that's cool. And then, of course, Naomi changed her name. She says, I don't want to be pleasant anymore. I want everyone to know I'm bitter. And so she says, call me Mara. So those names tell us something about these characters. They tell us something about where all this is going right away in chapter 1. And I just thought that was intriguing, and that didn't really have a place on Sunday.
Yeah.
But these names, they mean something. They help us understand these characters beyond the surface of what the words tell about them. Because the words have meaning.
Means strength.
Yes, it does.
It's pretty cool.
It does.
Strength and beauty together. Yeah.
Well, and that's, again, spoiler alert, is there is the world's definition of strength. And we're going to see that Boaz's portrayal of strength, his declaration of strength, looks very different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we'll get there. So that right away, that's what we cut. And then for me, I like outliers in the Bible. I like people who were rebels, rebels with a cause. I don't, I feel like a rebel sometimes. Maybe I want to be a rebel. I don't know. I've never thought about that. I should probably go to counseling over that one.
Maybe.
But I don't want to be a rebel just to be a rebel. I don't want to be different or a challenger just to be a challenger. I'm an Enneagram 8. I hate status quo. I'm a contrarian. You tell me to believe something, I'm going to say why.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I don't believe you, not because I don't care, not because I just think challenging is funny, but because I have to internalize what is your objection to this.
Mm-hmm.
And when I internalize that, I can carry forth that attitude or carry forth that belief because it's internalized to me, and then it becomes conviction. And I like this because Ruth was a challenger. I mean, this is a young girl who literally, here's what I wrote in my notes. I got to find it. Ruth broke nearly every social norm of her time. Too often when we read the book of Ruth, we totally overlook this striking character trait that she was a mold breaker. The society that Ruth grew up in was filled with boxes, especially boxes for young women, and she broke pretty much every box that can be broken without engaging in immorality or sin. And that's intriguing to me because I think some people in our church need to be unleashed, that they don't have to fit the mold. They don't have to look like everyone else. They can be different and not be disobedient.
Yeah, because oftentimes you see these molds or you see just tradition. Well, let's say just tradition. And you think to break from tradition is a sin, when in some ways staying in tradition is more of a sin, because it prevents you from doing justice and mercy and righteousness, when sometimes the mold keeps you in these things that those reaching outside of the box is really what Christ calls us to, and what Christ modeled was to extend beyond your traditional sense of whatever that limitation is.
And that this is this is Kyle reading into it, but you know, what I can honestly say, and what's true for me is true for everyone who's listening to this, is that we have a bias when we show up to the scriptures. Our bias is maybe not intentional, but it's put upon us, or it's brought upon us, or it's lived within us because of the life that we've lived, because of the culture that we know. I mean, I cannot show up to scripture any other way than being, you know, a middle-aged person in Northeast Ohio who passionately loves Jesus and thinks that his word is not only has depth beyond my understanding, but is still active and alive today. Okay. Now I know not everyone shows up that way, but that's a bias. I bring my lived reality to the text.
Yeah.
And then I have to check that. I have to unpack that. But when I try to do that, one of the things that I can't help but relate to is how often do our churches, and I mean our church, but I also mean the capital C church, we hit a rhythm, right? You see a cadence, you see hey, our church is attracting these kind of people. Our church, you know, here, we have a gift at our church. And again, it is not, Seth and I guess we played a part in it, but it wasn't by design. We are operating in grace. Our church is multicultural and multi-generational. Right. That is a gift. This is the first multicultural, multi-generational church that I've ever operated in. Mm-hmm. And I've had to work really hard to tune my attention to protecting that. But I will say some other churches I worked at, you know, everyone kind of looked the same. Mm-hmm. Everyone was a younger, professional, highly aware, educated, culturally aware individual who had a passion for God. And then when you have someone who doesn't look like you, someone who doesn't act like you, show up and buy into the scandal that is Jesus Christ, the scandal of grace, they disrupt you. And I love seeing it. We have right now, we've grown fast, and that is a gift. And it's also sometimes not a gift. One of the gift aspects of it is that I think that our trajectory over the last 4 years is we have not become settled. Mm. And that is my prayer. I pray that as a church, we never become settled. Right. Because if the moment we become settled that's the moment we need to become unsettled, because we serve an unsettling God. He has not done. If he wanted us to be settled, then he'd come back and get us. Mm-hmm. Right. The bride is not ready. We have work to do. And so our church, but I see it from my vantage point. I see people that don't look like us. I see people who don't fit the norm. I think of this lady in our church who she is not the norm. Colored hair, you know, tattoos everywhere. You know, she's from the south side of heaven, meaning that, you know, her life has not caught up to maybe what we'd say the behavioral norms of a typical Christian is. But there is no doubt in my mind that she loves Jesus and that she is passionately following him. And here's the deal. I love it because I do not have to be the behavior police. I'm not a moral police officer. I am a pastor, and my job is not to convict people. My job is to point people to truth and let the Holy Spirit do the convicting. And there's no doubt in my mind that the Holy Spirit is up to something in this girl's life. But what I love, other than all of that disruption that she provides, is this girl is one of the most faithful servant leaders that we have. Mm-hmm. She pours out, and she doesn't pour out in the limelight. She pours out behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. She pours out in ways that no one will ever see. And she just serves. And every time I see her, she's a disruption to what I'm used to seeing. Now, I don't mean that negative. I want you to hear that. I don't mean that negative. If I were to equate my life on a spectrum, that as a person that would probably not be found in my house or be called a friend, but because of Jesus,
right? Yeah,
she would be called a friend.
Right.
She would be found in my house, and she dismantles my preconceived notions that thank God she's dismantling, of what God is after, and he cares far more about the heart than he does this outward appearance. And I think that's so great. And sometimes, what I would want to say to listeners who don't go to our church is, man, if your church seems settled, pray for an unsettling.
Yeah.
Pray for more people who don't look like you.
That's a good prayer. It's a challenging prayer, but it's definitely what, we're called to just stir up the things that have settled, right? I mean, you think Absolutely. Of like a swamp is settled and is not moving,
What does it produce? Mosquitoes.
Yeah, mosquitoes, midges or something.
Yeah.
But no, it's just, that water, is meant to move, and it's supposed to, move through us. And if there's no movement, then, we're just getting, kind of getting blinded by our comforts, which, then you try to fight for your comforts. And is that really the type of energy that God wants us to fight for, versus putting ourselves in messy situations in dealing with the realities of what there's a discomfort to that. But, we haven't arrived yet. And that's when there's rest. God calls us to rest. Like, we're not saying like, don't stop moving or, there is biblical rest, but at the same time, that's different from what we're talking about, which is like, I would almost call it bondage in some ways, like a bondage of like just being stuck.
Yeah. Well,
and stagnant, unwilling.
It's interesting. We get comfortable, and yet, what does Jesus say? This is not our home.
Right.
Like, we got to remember, this is not our home.
Mm-hmm.
We are foreigners. We're aliens. We don't look like everyone else. And I think when we start to look like everyone else, whoa,
mm-hmm.
is that good?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so exactly what you're saying. I know what you're. I don't know that I would say it's bondage, but I know what you're implying. And then, again, what I would say to the people who do call our church home is, do not forsake these special days.
Mm-hmm.
These are not normal days. This unsettling that you maybe have come to love. The only way that we will maintain the unsettling is if we as individuals do not allow ourselves to become settled.
Mm.
And so my advice, my pastoral counsel to you is, if everyone in your social world looks and acts like you've become settled. And maybe you need a foreigner to walk into your world. An outsider who goes, wow, you look different, you live different, and I want to inspect and see if your God is better than the gods that I was taught to follow.
Mm.
And I will tell you, that shakes you up.
I wonder, you said something last week in relation to something else, not on Sunday, just personally in conversation, just how like purpose is one of the greatest blessings that we can give people, right? And this idea that when we see how God is putting people in our path, we see how the Lord is at work behind the scenes, making plays and moves that are outside of our control, which is literally the entire book of Ruth, right? Like it's so much more of a book about God's provision in how he was, orchestrating these things. But when we see things not as disruptions or inconveniences, but as purpose to engage in, it changes the scenario from, oh, this is a disruption to this is now my purpose. And we can see that as a blessing. For us with summer, we're in summer season right now. I don't know when you're listening to this, but we're just kicking off summer. We talked about that. Like, it means like maybe neighborhood kids are a little around more. Neighborhood kids, like, I love them, right? But at the same time, it can be a disruption to your normal.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And do you see that as a disruption, or can our families see these foreigners, right? Like foreigners to our ecosystems, our homes, our neighborhood, like as opportunities to welcome in and to show them something else, right? So all of this that we're talking about, like you said, like purpose is one of the greatest blessings. And we see that as like God is calling us into purpose to, reach those around us. And there's a lot of blessing as well as discomfort, but we're not called to comfort.
But is it okay? Comfort is we all feel it. You know what I'm saying? Like we all know comfort, we all know discomfort. And I'm not trying to minimize it. I'm not trying to shift that. That's real. But I think sometimes we limit the weight of it to go vantage point. You know what I'm saying? Because in our comfort, we limit our vantage point from what we understand.
Yeah.
And I think that's the crazy part is that when God pushes us towards discomfort, what he's saying is he says, I want to expand your vantage point. Mm-hmm. I want you to see, to feel, to understand things that are different. And that's the part of our world that is so beautiful and complex. We're a global society. Mm-hmm. My grandparents grew up in a world where something could happen in another country on the other side of the world, and they might not ever know about it. An atrocity might happen, and it might be able to be hidden and masked and unknown. And my child, and especially my grandchildren, I do not have grandchildren. I hope to someday have grandchildren, but they're going to grow up in a world where nothing will not be known. In the world.
Yeah.
And so there's a blessing to that is going, man, that means that you get to see and feel and experience the weight of the world. And the curse, or not the curse, but the caution in that is that we can become so numb or deaf.
Right. Yeah. Oh man.
Or allow it to just be information.
Right.
And the only way we break down the information from just being information is when we actually know someone, when we have a conversation.
You're talking about like know someone who's going through that, like
we have relationship. We don't talk about people, we talk to people.
Yeah, and it's just different when you're like, oh, this person's going through a tragedy versus that tragedy being, you see it, but when it's connected to you, you're like, oh, it hits different.
Yeah.
So, well, we've talked a lot. I feel like we should wrap up here. Anything else?
No, I'm just going to tell you, stay tuned. So in a couple weeks, we're going to deep dive. There was 2 podcasts for this series. Mm-hmm. So this is the first one, kind of set the table, what it is, where it lives. And then next week, we're going to deep dive Boaz and just the kinsman redeemer and the flip on masculinity that I think he provides.
Sweet. Well, look forward to that. Again, hopefully this challenge, hopefully it makes you go like, the sermon big question was, you're Moab. Like it challenges where our disobedience and the discomfort that disobedience, pushes us into, and it challenged a lot of that. And there's this idea of coming back to the Father. So that's from the sermon, right? But from today, it's like, what area maybe you haven't been necessarily disobedient flagrantly, but is your comfort pushing you into places of stagnancy where you're missing out on opportunities to engage? Just like Ruth was a outsider, society outside of societal norms, Jesus exists. His whole ministry exists in this space of outside of societal norms. And, what is the challenge for you there? And even just like when you look back at your days, will you see this purpose being lived out by saying yes to what uncomfortable places God's calling you into? So we hope this was uplifting. We can't wait for a couple weeks to get into more of this. Join us on Sundays. Don't miss Father's Day, with us. There's a lot of opportunities to grow. We hope you take a step in some way of growing deeper in your faith. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us today on What We Couldn't Say on Sunday. We hope this podcast helps you dive deeper into God's Word and possibly answered some questions that you may have had from Sunday. Don't forget to check out our website for more information about Friends Church and all that is happening. We hope to see you this weekend.